Let's go through them. Let's start with consumption. This is vehicular miles traveled. They're down to 40% of their peak. Now, obviously, COVID is part of that. But in the 6 months since COVID lockdowns ended, they haven't picked up at all. Why? Demographics. The people who are most likely to be mobile are people in their 20s. And we're now discovering that over the course of the last 6 years, they've run out. Or you can look at their purchasing power. Here's vehicle sales. Now, whenever a country modernizes in the current age, everybody wants the same 4 things. They want a smartphone, they want a refrigerator, they want climate control, typically AC, and they want a car. The red line here is the 12-month moving average. You'll notice not only have they not recovered to pre-COVID levels, they peaked a year and a half before COVID. Now, if you think back on the last 5-6 years, a lot of it has gone down. We had COVID, which scrambled all the data, even if everyone was being conscientious about it, which no one was. China has disappeared into a cult of personality. And the information that we normally would be able to assess either hasn't been there or has been overshadowed. But now that COVID's behind us and the Trump administration is behind us, we're getting a kind of a look under everybody's hood. And we're discovering in the last 5-6 years, we've hit a lot of turning points that we kind of missed. In the case of China, they now say that the Chinese population peaked last year. But as they're interpreting the data, 5 years on, they're discovering actually that probably happened 12 years ago. They found out that the American population became younger than the average Chinese citizen probably 4 years ago. Turns out that was probably back in 2006. India surpassed China to become the largest population this year. That probably happened in 2014. We're finally getting a kind of a clear look, and we've missed China's peak. And it's not that we're at a plateau, it's we're already on the backside of that mountain. And it's only going to accelerate, because if you have had a 70% drop in the birth rate, you are looking at national oblivion. Now, how do you get something like this to grow if there's no consumption? Well, you've got 3 types of economic growth. Your first one's consumption-led. That's the United States. That's Mexico. The second one is export-led. That's Germany. That's Korea. And the third one is investment-led. You basically throw money to build infrastructure, to build industrial plant. And that activity of the expansion is what drives the system. And that has always been China's #1 source of growth. Most of it is driven by debt. And this is a debt graphic. So the orange line, that's corporate, the gray line is government, and the blue is household. I need to put this all in perspective because this doesn't look very dramatic, does it? Well, #1, let's look at corporate because that's the biggest chunk. Back at the beginning of this data in 2006, that was already more debt in absolute terms, not relative, absolute terms than the entire American corporate world, and it then doubled. Second, this is in percent of GDP. So if the Chinese have been having 5 to 10% growth a year, that means the debt has been going up by 10 to 20% a year. So the absolute numbers are much bigger than this suggests. Third, the government debt, that's a bigger build than Trump, that's a bigger build than Obama. And it's all local debt. You know, say what you will about the federal government's debt program. Is it responsible? No. But they have the Fed to back them out, bail them out if they need to. Because ultimately, federal debt is backed by the currency. We're the global currency. The Federal Reserve can change the money supply with a click of a button. You can't do that if it's Chicago. And so they've added $10.5 trillion of local debt in 15 years, which is about 3 times what our total local debt exposure is. And then finally, there's households. Now, their household debt has now surpassed US household debt. But the crazy thing is that's the good news. You guys been watching what's been happening with real estate in China lately? Oh my God. Okay, so you know, ghost cities, we've all heard about them. The red circles are where no one lives in a ghost city. And the orange circles are where governments have moved in, but no one has followed. 2 things from this. #1, most of the real estate was paid for with cash. It was not lent. It's owned outright. When you have an investment-led system that distorts the capital structure so much, people are desperate to find ways to preserve and grow their money. The Chinese government prevents people from sending money abroad, so they have to find something at home. They usually go for real estate. So for your average Chinese citizen, over 85% of their savings is in some sort of real estate function. Here's the crazy part. The overbuild in subprime was 3 to 4% of the housing stock in the United States, and we know how that felt. The overbuild in China is 100 to 200%. They have enough spare condos to house somewhere between 1.5 and 3 billion people. The market value of product in that sort of environment, it's probably 10 to 20% of what they paid for it. When this goes down, it's not so much that it's a financial hit to the country, no, because it's not on the debt sheet, but it destroys the sum total of the population's life savings. So on top of everything else that the Chinese have going on, you're looking at 1.3 billion people who are probably going to be a little upset in the not too distant future. And that's assuming there's not a war, which there probably will be. This is an energy flow graphic. So the green bars on the left, those are net oil exports. The red on the right are net oil imports. You'll notice how conveniently close together they are. It's about a 5,500 to 7,000 mile sail from the Persian Gulf energy fields to the Northeast Asians based on where you start and where you stop. This route is how everything is shipped right now. The coastal route, it's the short route. The Chinese have dozens of weapon systems that can interfere with that route. So if we get into a shooting war because of something with the Iranians or the Saudis, or let's say Russian energy goes offline and prices go up, there's not enough left for everybody, you get a roving naval war between the Japanese and the Chinese, the tankers won't use that route. They'll take this longer route that avoids the Chinese coast. China has a big navy, 600 ships, twice ours. But about 2/3 of those vessels would fit in this room. Not at the same time, don't be dumb. The point is they don't have range. Only about 8 to 10% of those ships can sail more than 1,000 miles without a refuel. And that 1,000-mile range assumes that they're going slow in a straight line to save fuel, not that they're like dodging missiles. The Chinese cannot project power. They can't control their own sea lanes. They are utterly dependent upon freedom of the seas in order to function. And so if we do get a shooting war, the energy stops, their entire transport system shuts down, the natural gas that they import in liquefied form goes away, their chemical sector dies the next day, and China will disassociate within a year. And since they import 80% of the stuff they used to grow their own food, we also get a famine that kills people, hundreds of millions of people, within 2 years. Now, the Chinese government was well aware of this 5 years ago. But over the last 5 years, it stopped functioning as a government because Xi has purged the system so thoroughly of anyone who is even theoretically competent in order to prevent anyone from rising up from below to potentially challenge him or replace him. And in doing so, he has so terrified the bureaucracy at this point that no one will bring him information at all. As a result, the system's breaking down, and their ability to collect data, much less process it and publish it, has basically stopped. Now, some of these things are ego-driven. So, for example, the Chinese just stopped collecting information on COVID because they didn't want everyone to know how many people died when they did their opening. We just don't know. We don't even have an educated guess, honestly. But some of this stuff really matters. Youth unemployment. We don't know what the status of the next generation is. Patents, which supposedly you need for an information-based society. The information is no longer collected. Bond purchases. How the hell do you have a bond market if you don't know what's on offer and who is buying what? That was supposedly how they were going to get away from an investment-led system, to have a different debt market. Well, that's gone. But the ones that scare me the most are more personal. Political biographies, college dissertations. Because that's how young people get a foot in the system and move up. and Xi's made sure that they can't, so they can never challenge him. So it's just him. Now, my biggest criticism of Barack Obama is he believed he was the smartest person in the room, and he would tell people that. His first meeting with the Joint Chiefs, you got all the 3 and the 4 stars in the room. He said, I'm smarter than all of you. I can do your jobs better than all of you. Let's assume for the moment that Barack Obama was correct. So, you're going to do everyone's jobs here and your own. No. Xi has done that for the entire country. Decisions cannot be made without him. The reason he didn't show up to the G20 summit wasn't because he was mad at the Indians, although he was. It's because he had to do it home, because he's the only one who can make decisions. And I think the best way to kind of explain how this is leading to a state collapse is that stupid balloon. Now, I'm not a balloon expert. That's just not in my field. And neither is the American president. But we had pretty much the same response when the thing crossed over from Canada. I'm sure Canada's at fault for this somehow. It was like, shoot the thing down, let's see what we're dealing with. I mean, the balloon was 350 feet across. It was dangling something the size of an Embraer jet. It was like 14 times the size of the plane that I flew on here yesterday. Which, is tiny unless it's dangling from a balloon. So, it's obviously it was a spy platform. So let's shoot it down and see what we got. The DOD and the CIA, secretary and director, went to President Biden, like, Mr. President, please don't shoot this thing down. We're not threatened. We really are not concerned about this. We know where it's going. It's going to float over the missile silos in Montana. But Mr. President, unless you're planning on firing a few dozen nukes in the next few days, those hatches are going to be closed. They're always closed, Mr. President. The Chinese will get photos of closed hatches from 7 miles away. We are not scared about this. But Mr. President, there's an opportunity here. Because if you let this thing go on its merry way, we'll put a spy helicopter below it, and a spy plane above it, and every whisper sensor we have, and we will track over the next 9 days. And we'll copy all their cryptography. We'll trace the signals through the civilian information exchange network. We'll see which satellites they're using. And we will trace it back, not to the city, not to the block, not to the building, not to the floor, not to the office, to the terminal that is doing the controls. And Mr. President, we have the best hackers in the world. We will hack that of a terminal. We will find out who is on it, and then we will trace them using signals intelligence and map out their whole world. Mr. President, the Chinese have handed us the intelligence breakthrough of the decade. All you have to do is let the thing float. And then when it gets over North Carolina, we'll shoot it down and we'll get the hardware too, which we did. We now know that Xi was unaware of the balloon's existence until after it was shot down. He's that much in the dark. No one would tell him. We now know that their Ministry of Defense was unaware of it until it crossed into American airspace. It was just some in the Intelligence Bureau who thought, this is what Wolf Warrior diplomacy means. This is how you stick it to the Americans. We're seeing breakdowns like this at every government level, in every economic sector. The capacity of the Chinese to make decisions, to flow information, has stopped. This was the dumbest thing I have seen any country do in the last 20 years. And if you think back on the last 2 decades, there has been so much dumb. This is what state failure looks like in the early stages. So yes, China, 10 years tops, but it can end so much faster.